We have 3 readings this morning. The first one is Acts chapter 10, and that's on page 129 of your New Testament. These are all New Testament. 129, the page, what I call chapter 10, and verses 34 to 43. Then Peter began to speak to them. I truly understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him, and does what is right. You know the message he sent to the people of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. That message spread throughout Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism that John announced, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, how he went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. We are witnesses to all that he did, both in Judea and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree, but God raised him on the 3rd day and allowed him to appear, not to all people, but to us who were chosen by God as witnesses, and who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one ordained by God as judge of the living and the dead. All the prophets, living and dead, testify about him that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. And now a very short reading from Paul in his letter to the Colossians. It's page 201 in your New Testament, and it is chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. So if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth, for you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. And now, page 33 of the New Testament, the Apostle of the Gospel of Matthew, page 33, sorry. That's chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from the heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples. He has been raised from the dead, and indeed he's going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him. This is my message to you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings!" And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. Amen. Thanks be to God.
What did they think they were going to do? What was their plan? Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, they had been in the garden when Jesus had been arrested. They had watched his trial. They stood at the feet of the cross while their friend and rabbi had suffered and finally died. And they watched as his lifeless body was laid in the tomb. They saw the temple guards at the tomb, those guards that had rolled that huge stone over the entrance. They saw that stone. What were they thinking? How are they going to move that stone? How are you going to move that stone? Or how am I? What is it that is dead or deadening in your life or in mine? How in the world are you going to move that stone so that you can get to it? And then the foundations rocked. That earthquake hit. Have you ever been in an earthquake? I grew up in Southern California, and I can tell you that earthquakes are not matter of fact. You hear the earthquake before you feel it. It sounds like a huge freight train about to run straight through your house, while the world around you loses all of its solidity. Not even terra firma is firm anymore. And if you're out in the open, it's even more terrifying because you're afraid that the earth is going to open up right beneath you. It's as though the whole world is being reshaped and made over again. The story of Jesus' death and resurrection as we read it in the Gospel of Matthew has earthquake bookends. You remember that when Jesus is hanging on the cross, when he finally dies and breathes his last, the earth shook. And then after his resurrection, when the angel moved that stone away from the sealed and empty tomb, opening up that emptiness for all to see, there was another earthquake. And so with these two earthquakes, we see that the power of the crucifixion, the power of death, is gathered up into the power of the resurrection. The power of the resurrection gathers up all the death dealing that you and I cope with. The power of the resurrection gathers up all of the shame, all of the broken relationships, all of the betrayals and false accusations, all of the suffering. The power of the resurrection gathers all of that up and transforms it from death to life, transforms it from brokenness to wholeness. Earthquakes shake the foundations. And that's what God is doing in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, shaking the foundations. God went to the most extreme. God went all the way to death so that he could bring about new life. God shook the earth to the very foundations in order to raise something up completely new. God didn't just patch things together and put on a happy face. God shook the earth to its foundations in order to rebuild and to renew from the bottom up. And that rebuilding and that renewing work began with the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and it has continued ever since. Foundations continue to be shaken, and new life continues to emerge in its wake. The women who went to that tomb early on that Sunday morning could not have moved that stone on their own, and the guards certainly weren't going to help them. Only the power of God could move that stone. Only the power of God could reveal to them the emptiness of death. And you and I can't move those stones on our own either. Only the power of God can break open the tombs of our lives and bring forth life. Only the power of God can bring healing to a relationship that is way too far gone. Only the power of God can take shame and breathe into it the life of forgiveness, bringing forth new life. Only the power of God can take the destruction of our intolerance and turn it into justice. Only the power of God can take the despair of death and replace it with hope. Only the power of God can remake our covetous greed into generosity. Only the power of God can take our infidelities and bring trust and new life. Only the power of God can take our self-importance and our self-absorption and turn it into compassion. Only the power of God can take our inertia and turn it into action. The power of God not only can, but does remake and renew and bring new life in every part of our lives, your life and mine, where death and sin has a stronghold. That's the promise of Easter. It's not that we will ever get Easter. We may never fully understand it, but that's not the message. The message is that Easter gets us as we are and remakes us from the foundations up. Because Jesus Christ is risen from the dead, God's new world has begun. And we are not only the beneficiaries of that, we also are the agents of that new creation. You'll notice in the story that Jesus doesn't hang around the tomb. The angel tells the Marys he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. Sisters and brothers, Jesus is already ahead of us. Jesus is out there in the Galilees of our world, bringing resurrection life to every corner of death. And our mission in life is to follow him and to join him in his resurrection. Yesterday, I heard the story of a gentleman who had borrowed his friend's Jeep. And he was driving along a rather busy highway in Oregon when he got a flat tire. And he pulled over, and he realized there was no jack in the car. Apparently he didn't have AAA, so he just waited. He just waited for someone to stop and help. But no one did. And so he put a big sign in the window, "Need a jack." Nothing. And he was about to start hitching a ride when a van pulled over with a family in it, and a guy bounded out. It was a Mexican immigrant. Well, he sized up the situation, and he called for his daughter out of the van who spoke English. And he conveyed through her that he had a jack, but it was too small for the Jeep. So they would need to brace it. And then he went and got a saw from the van, and he cut a section out of a great big log that was lying by the side of the road. And they rolled that log over, put his jack on top, and they were in business. And so the guy with the Jeep started to take the wheel off, but he broke the guy's tire iron. It was one of those collapsible ones, and he wasn't careful, and he snapped the head clean off. No worries. The guy ran back to his van and handed that broken tire iron to his wife, and she was gone with a flash down the road to buy a new tire iron. She was back in 15 minutes, and the tire finally got changed. The two of them were filthy and sweaty, and his wife produced a large water jug for them to wash their hands and their faces. And the Jeep guy tried to pull a $20 bill into the man's hand, but he wouldn't take it. So instead, the Jeep guy went up to the van and gave it to his wife, as quietly as possible. And he thanked them up one side and down the other. He was so grateful. And he asked the daughter where they lived, thinking maybe he could send a gift for them being so awesome. She said that they lived in Mexico. They were in Oregon so that Mommy and Daddy could pick cherries for the next few weeks. And then after that, they were going to pick peaches. And then they would go home. After the goodbyes were said, he started walking back to the Jeep, and the girl called out and asked if he'd had any lunch. And he told her no, so she ran up and she handed him a tamale. And he opened the foil on the tamale, and what do you think he found inside? That $20 bill. He whirled around and he ran to the van and he knocked on the window and the guy rolled it down. And the gentleman saw that $20 bill in his hand and he just started to say no. Well, the Jeep guy pleaded, "Por favor, por favor, por favor, please, please, please." And the guy just smiled. And with what looked like great concentration, he said in English, "Today you, tomorrow me." This family, undoubtedly poorer than just about anyone else along that stretch of highway, working on a seasonal basis where time is money, took a couple of hours out of their day to help a strange guy on the side of the road. Our mission is to bring resurrection life to the world. To bring resurrection life to those who don't have enough food. To bring resurrection life to boardrooms where ethical decisions make a huge difference. To bring resurrection life to lonely elderly neighbors. To bring resurrection life to our colleagues at work, whose best answer at the death of a sibling is, it is what it is. You and I, as followers of Jesus Christ, we bring resurrection life whenever we offer forgiveness, whenever we stand firm against bullying, whenever we do the right thing, sometimes even at great cost to ourselves. But you know the amazing thing? The truly amazing thing is that as you and I bring resurrection life to another, we find our own lives remade in the process. You remember that giant stone that keeps all that death locked up? Well, it's met the power of God. You and I no longer have to let that stone stop us from joining Jesus in resurrection life. This is a resurrection meal. It's a resurrection feast. The risen Christ meets you and me here in bread and in wine to remake, to reshape us so that we might live as a resurrection people and bring that resurrection life to bear upon all the death that we encounter in the world. So come, taste and see. The Lord is good. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed.